was supposed to be a quiet handoff, a box of photos, a quick goodbye between exes. But on a dark September night in Carlsbad, California, one man walked into the desert and never came back the same. September 1st, 2016, 8:47 p.m. Greg Mulvihill pulls his truck onto a dirt road near the railroad tracks. His ex-wife, Diane Lovejoy, had called him earlier that evening. She said she had something for him. Old family photos, mementos from their marriage. She insisted they meet here, alone, away from the courts and lawyers. Greg brought a friend who stayed in the car. He stepped out into the darkness, flashlight in hand, expecting a brief exchange. What he got instead was a bullet tearing through his torso. The gunshot echoed across the empty desert. Greg collapsed, bleeding into the dirt. But he was still conscious, still breathing, still fighting. And what he told police in those desperate moments would unravel a conspiracy that shocked an entire community. A fitness mom, a bitter custody battle, a hitman for hire. This is the story of how love turned to obsession, how a mother's desperation became deadly, and how one man survived an ambush that was months in the making. Who would want Greg Mulvihill dead? And why did his ex-wife Diane Lovejoy insist on meeting him in the dark, alone? Was this a setup or a deadly misunderstanding? These are the questions that would consume investigators for months. What really happened that night? Who pulled the trigger? And how did a trusted fitness coach, a woman who preached health and wellness to hundreds of clients, end up in handcuffs facing a murder conspiracy charge? The answers would reveal a plot so calculated, so cold-blooded, that even seasoned detectives were left stunned. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a moment of rage. This was premeditated. This was planned. And the evidence trail would lead investigators to a relationship that nobody saw coming, a connection forged not in love but in something far more dangerous. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Before the headlines and handcuffs, Diane Lovejoy was the picture of success. A fitness instructor with a loyal following. A YouTube health coach who uploaded workout videos and motivational content. A devoted mother who spoke passionately about raising her son. Her husband, Greg Mulvihill, was an engineer, known for his quiet loyalty, his steady income, and his love for his family. They met in the mid-2000s in Southern California, a place where sunshine and ambition blend seamlessly. Diane was already building a career in fitness, teaching classes at local gyms, training clients one-on-one, and cultivating an image of strength and positivity. Greg was the stable force, the provider, the man who worked long hours so Diane could chase her dreams. They married in 2007. Friends described them as a complementary pair, Diane's energy balanced by Greg's calm. They bought a home in Carlsbad, a coastal city known for its affluent neighborhoods and family-friendly atmosphere. For a while it seemed like they had everything, but beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Diane struggled with infertility. The couple went through years of treatments, hopes raised and dashed repeatedly. When they finally had a son in 2009, it should have been the happy ending they'd been waiting for. But instead, the stress of parenthood exposed deeper issues. Diane became increasingly controlling. She monitored Greg's schedule, questioned his decisions, and grew resentful of the time he spent at work. Greg, for his part, withdrew. He buried himself in his career, avoiding confrontation, hoping things would improve. They didn't. By 2014, the marriage was effectively over. Greg moved out. Diane stayed in the family home with their son. And that's when the real battle began. When the marriage crumbled, things got ugly. The divorce was messy. The custody battle was brutal. Diane didn't just want primary custody. She wanted sole custody. She wanted Greg out of their son's life entirely. She began making accusations. She claimed Greg was neglectful, that he was emotionally abusive, that he was an unfit father. None of these claims were substantiated. Family court investigators found no evidence of abuse. Friends and family members testified that Greg was a loving, involved parent. But Diane persisted. She hired multiple attorneys. She filed motion after motion. She used every legal tool at her disposal to limit Greg's access to their son. The courts, however, didn't side with her. In fact, the custody evaluations began to paint a different picture. Psychologists who interviewed both parents noted that Diane exhibited signs of obsessive behavior. She was unable to let go. She was fixated on control. She couldn't accept that Greg had a right to be a father. As the custody proceedings dragged on, Diane's frustration grew. She posted cryptic messages on social media. She vented to friends about how unfair the system was. She convinced herself that Greg was manipulating the courts, that he was poisoning their son against her, that he was the villain in her story. And when the courts didn't give her what she wanted, when it became clear that Greg would have joint custody, Diane decided to take matters into her own hands. She didn't just want to win the custody battle anymore. She wanted Greg gone. Permanently. Enter Weldon McDavid Jr., a former United States Marine, a firearms instructor. A man in his 50s with a military background and access to weapons. He wasn't a hitman by trade. He wasn't a career criminal. But he was someone Diane believed she could trust. They met in early 2016 at a shooting range where Weldon worked part-time. Diane had signed up for firearms training, ostensibly for self-defense. But the relationship quickly became more than instructor and student. Text messages recovered later would show that Diane and Weldon communicated frequently. She confided in him about her custody battle. She painted Greg as a dangerous man, someone who was trying to destroy her life. She told Weldon that she feared for her safety, that she needed protection, that Greg might come after her. Weldon, for reasons that remain unclear, believed her. Or perhaps he didn't believe her but was drawn into her orbit by something else. Manipulation, attraction, a misguided sense of duty. Whatever the reason, he agreed to help her. The plan began to take shape over the summer of 2016. Diane told Weldon that she wanted to scare Greg, to send him a message to make him back off. She suggested they could stage a confrontation, something that would rattle him but not physically harm him. At least, that's what she would later claim. But the evidence suggests otherwise. Text messages between Diane and Weldon reveal a much darker plan. They discussed locations. They discussed timing. They discussed how to lure Greg to an isolated spot. Diane suggested using the pretense of exchanging family photos, items from their marriage that she claimed Greg wanted back. She chose a location near the railroad tracks off Avenida Soledad, a remote dirt road with no streetlights, no witnesses, no surveillance cameras. She told Greg to meet her there after dark, and she made sure she wouldn't be the one waiting for him. On September 1st, 2016, at approximately 8:30 p.m., Diane called Greg. She told him she had a box of old photos and personal items that belonged to him. She said she wanted to return them, that it was time to move on, that this could be a peaceful exchange. Greg was skeptical. Their relationship had been contentious for years. But he agreed to meet her, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this was a genuine attempt at closure. He asked a friend to come with him. They drove to the location in Greg's truck. When they arrived, the area was dark and deserted. Greg's friend stayed in the vehicle while Greg stepped out with a flashlight. He walked a short distance down the dirt road, looking for Diane. She wasn't there, but someone else was. Weldon McDavid was positioned in the brush, approximately 50 yards from where Greg stood. He had a rifle. He had a clear line of sight. And according to later testimony, he had been given the green light. Greg heard movement. He turned. Before he could react, a shot rang out. The bullet struck him in the side, tearing through muscle and narrowly missing vital organs. Greg fell to the ground, bleeding, disoriented, but still conscious. His friend heard the gunshot and immediately called 911. Greg managed to crawl back toward the truck, his hand pressed against the wound, his mind racing. He didn't see the shooter clearly, but he caught a glimpse, a tall figure, military stance, moving quickly through the brush. Paramedics arrived within minutes. Greg was rushed to the hospital. He survived, but barely. And as he lay in the emergency room, detectives were already beginning to piece together what had happened. When investigators arrived at the scene, they found shell casings, tire tracks, and blood. They interviewed Greg's friend, who described hearing the gunshot and seeing Greg collapse. They interviewed Greg himself, who, despite his injuries, was able to provide a description of the shooter. Tall, stocky, moved with precision, likely had military or tactical training. Detectives immediately began looking at Greg's life. Who would want him dead? The answer seemed obvious. His ex-wife. Diane Lovejoy had been fighting him in court for years. She had motive. She had opportunity. And when detectives checked her phone records, they found something damning. Multiple calls and text messages between Diane and a man named Weldon McDavid Jr. in the days leading up to the shooting. Weldon's name ran through the system. Former Marine, firearms instructor. No prior criminal record but access to weapons and tactical knowledge. Detectives obtained a warrant for Weldon's phone and vehicle. What they found was explosive. Weldon's phone pinged near the crime scene at the exact time of the shooting. His vehicle, a truck registered in his name, had been seen on surveillance footage driving toward Avenida Soledad that evening. And when forensic teams examined the shell casings found at the scene, they matched the caliber of a rifle Weldon owned. Detectives brought Weldon in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. He claimed he didn't know anything about a shooting. He said he was home that night. But when investigators showed him the phone records, the GPS data, the forensic evidence, his story began to fall apart. He admitted he was at the scene, but he claimed it was Diane's idea. He said she had asked him to scare Greg to fire a warning shot to send a message. He insisted he never intended to kill anyone. The bullet, he said, was meant to miss. It didn't. Under mounting pressure, Weldon's story continued to evolve. He admitted that Diane had been planning this for weeks. He admitted that she had chosen the location. He admitted that she had instructed him on when and where to be. And most damning of all, he admitted that Diane had told him Greg needed to be eliminated. Not scared, not warned, eliminated. Detectives turned their attention to Diane. When they knocked on her door, she appeared calm, almost unnervingly so. She denied any involvement. She claimed she had no idea Weldon would bring a gun. She said she only wanted to return some photos to Greg, that she had no knowledge of any plan to harm him. But the evidence said otherwise. Text messages recovered from both phones told a very different story. Messages where Diane discussed logistics. Messages where she confirmed the time and location. Messages where she asked Weldon if he was ready. And perhaps most chilling of all, a message sent just hours after the shooting. Diane texted Weldon asking, "Is it done?" His response was brief. "Don't worry, I took care of it." This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a plan gone wrong. This was a calculated attempt to murder Greg Mulvihill. And Diane Lovejoy was at the center of it. In the weeks following the shooting, both Diane Lovejoy and Weldon McDavid were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. The case quickly became a media sensation. A fitness mom turned murder conspirator. A decorated Marine turned accomplice. The story had all the elements of a crime thriller, except it was real. Diane maintained her innocence throughout. She hired a defense team that argued she was being framed, that Weldon had acted alone, that she had no knowledge of his intentions. But prosecutors had the evidence. They had the text messages. They had the phone records. They had Weldon's testimony. And they had Greg Mulvihill, alive and willing to testify. The trial began in 2018. The courtroom was packed. Media outlets covered every moment. And as the prosecution laid out their case, the full scope of Diane's plan became clear. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was premeditated. Diane had spent months grooming Weldon, convincing him that Greg was a threat, manipulating him into believing that violence was the only solution. She had carefully selected the location. She had orchestrated the meeting. She had ensured that she had plausible deniability by not being physically present. But her absence didn't absolve her. It only confirmed her guilt. The jury deliberated for several days, and when they returned, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty. Diane Lovejoy was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder. Weldon McDavid was also found guilty on the same charges. The judge sentenced Diane to 26 years to life in prison. Weldon received 50 years to life. Both would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Greg Mulvihill survived, but he was forever changed. He testified during the trial about the fear he felt that night, the betrayal, the realization that the mother of his child had tried to have him killed. He spoke about the impact on his son, a boy who would grow up knowing his mother was in prison for trying to murder his father. And he spoke about forgiveness, not for Diane, but for himself, so he could move forward, so he could rebuild his life, so he could be the father his son needed. It began as love, or at least what they thought was love. It turned to bitterness, resentment, obsession, and it ended in blood. What drives someone to destroy the person they once vowed to cherish? What makes a mother, someone entrusted with nurturing life, plot to take a life? The answers aren't simple. Diane Lovejoy wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. She was a woman who lost control, who became consumed by her need to win, who convinced herself that eliminating Greg was the only way to protect her son. But the truth is, she wasn't protecting anyone. She was destroying everything. Her son lost both parents that night. He lost his mother to prison and nearly lost his father to a bullet. The real casualty wasn't just Greg. It was trust itself. Trust in the legal system to resolve disputes fairly. Trust in co-parents to put their children first. Trust in the belief that people, even in their worst moments, won't cross certain lines. Diane crossed every line, and the consequences were devastating. So was justice really served, or did everyone lose that night? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if you thought this case was shocking, wait till you see what happened when another parent decided the court system wasn't moving fast enough. That story is coming next. Subscribe so you don't miss it. Because the truth is always more complicated than the headlines suggest, and the darkest crimes often come from the most unexpected places.